When television audiences think of the perfect example of the African-American nuclear family, they might first think of The Cosby Show. However, the show Good Times beat them to it by several years. Originally airing on CBS from 1974 to 79, the show is perhaps most well known as the earliest example of an African-American nuclear family on TV. However, for one of its stars, John Amos, this simple fact wasn't enough. As an incredibly forward-thinking actor for his time, Amos saw a lot of potential that the show was not reaching according to his standards, and that led him to have quite a bit of trouble with the show's creative team. Join Factsverse as John Amos reveals why he was killed off of Good Times. Good Times was about an African-American nuclear family led by husband and wife James and Florida Evans, played by John Amos and the Emmy Award-winning TV actress Esther Rolle. Although at its core it was certainly an original and novel concept to feature an African-American nuclear family, the show was actually a spin-off of the sitcom Maude, which was itself a spin-off of the hit sitcom All in the Family. Good Times followed the trials and tribulations of the Evans family as they traversed modern life in Chicago. It was a gigantic success with American audiences. It's often hailed as both a landmark in TV and a landmark in the normalization of the African-American nuclear family. However, a few of its stars, including John Amos at the forefront, took some umbrage with exactly how its African-American family was portrayed. Though the show had an incredibly successful run of 6 seasons, there were many times throughout the production where stars John Amos and Esther Rolle butted heads with the writers and producers. Infamously, Amos's quandaries with the creative staff eventually led to his contract for the show not being renewed after the show's 3rd season, upon which time his character was killed off. One of the main issues that both Amos and Rolle had with the show's direction was the decidedly negative and regressive portrayal of one of their on-screen sons, J.J. Evans, who was portrayed by actor and comedian Jimmy Walker. To understand the issue, it's important to note that although Good Times represented the first instance of an African-American family on television, its creative staff, including its writers, were still by and large white. As such, Amos felt their portrayal of the African-American family on screen was much more negative than positive, even given the show's landmark status. This was largely due to what he felt were overly stereotypical depictions of inaccurate and largely inauthentic black characters. John recently opened up about the decades-old situation on a radio interview. He was very candid about his problems and his eventual firing from what was arguably the starring role. Now, at 80 years old, the aging actor is willing to admit he could have perhaps been a little more cordial with the creative staff in voicing his issues with the way the characters on the show were being represented. However, as it was occurring, he claims to not have been able to handle himself as diplomatically as he would have liked, which certainly could have been a fairly large factor in his eventual firing. Still, it's hard to ignore that John had some good points to make, and even if the creative staff would have been more attentive to his wishes, the show could have been an even more progressive television landmark than it is. A good deal of his issues with the production stemmed from the fact that the show was such a landmark production for its time. Amos felt the African-American nuclear family's portrayal was incredibly important, and one small mischaracterization would do more harm than good for the black community. Amos had some strong qualms with the fact that the writing staff was totally white in the show's early years, and wasn't willing to take what he felt was rampant black stereotyping on their behalf with any amount of salt. If the show was supposed to be a landmark production for the normalization of African-American families, how come the voices of the show were coming from an all-white production staff? It's not difficult to see his points on this ground, and the issues only get more messy and complicated from here. Amos was quick to point out his opinions on anything he felt was a mischaracterization of black culture on the writer's behalf, and the writers didn't especially take kindly towards the intrusion, however justified it might have been. Hey, if you're enjoying this video, hit the like button to support more content, and make sure you subscribe to Factsverse to see more content like this in the future. While it certainly makes a lot of sense that John Amos took offense to the direction the show's creative staff was going, it was the general heated nature of the exchanges that turned out to be the major problem. According to Amos, he would go up to the writers and producers, exclaiming, "We can't do this, we can't do that," to which they would retort, "What do you mean we can't do this? When Amos took offense to the creative direction of the show, they would be quick to point out their television credentials, completely sidestepping his real issue. No matter how much experience they had with television, they had absolutely no experience with being part of the black community. Because of this, John felt he was the most qualified person to dictate how the black community truly acted in real life and should be represented on television. Understandably, the writers and producers soon began to take some umbrage themselves with being constantly undermined. While John Amos may have been the most vocal about his issues with the creative direction, he certainly wasn't alone. His on-screen wife Esther Roll was also less than impressed with the depictions of Black America that were coming from the all-white production staff. Roll even played a large part in the show during pre-production, as she is credited with ensuring the show would feature a complete nuclear family with a strong father figure. According to her, she refused to sign on to the show unless her character was given a devoted husband, which is what allowed the show to become the first depiction of an African-American nuclear family on television. The main problem for Amos and Roll was the depiction of the Evans family's eldest son, JJ. The oldest of the three sons, the character had a lot of potential to be a role model for the others, and to showcase a strong and responsible young African American for the audience. Given that the show had so much potential to be a much more progressive landmark than it ended up being for the black community, this issue only becomes all the more egregious. However, the writers and producers were adamant that JJ was to be the main comic relief for the show, and didn't want him to be portrayed in any way that didn't fit with that original idea. The writers and producers were possibly onto something. JJ is arguably the biggest reason the show managed to become as popular as it did. He added some winning slapstick humor to the otherwise fairly laid-back sitcom, and his catchphrase of "Dynamite" is perhaps the most fondly remembered bit from the show's run. But despite how popular and successful the depiction was, and the show because of it, both Amos and Roll still felt the show had some responsibility to challenge audiences. John Amos and Esther Roll truly felt the depiction of JJ was largely irresponsible, lacking nuance, and promoting a decidedly negative racial stereotype, doing more harm than good. John Amos became more vocal about JJ's negative characterization as the show went on, which actually only led to JJ's character becoming more broad and comical. The writing staff wasn't doing this out of spite, though, as JJ and his comic antics were arguably the thing that was attracting the most audience. When it comes to TV, nothing is more important than ratings. Eventually, the schism between Amos and the show's staff grew to be too much for the production to bear. He had only signed on for a 3-season run, and when those 3 seasons were up, production did not feel the need to renew it. Instead, they worked Amos's character's death into the storyline of the show, killing off the beloved and groundbreaking patriarch for good. Although John Amos was likely upset about his firing when it happened, the story does have a happy ending. Because of his firing, Amos was able to take on the role of Kunta Kinte in the television miniseries Roots. This role garnered him more attention than even Good Times, and finally allowed him to be the hero for the black community he knew he always wanted to be. He even went on to receive an Emmy nomination for it. Television has certainly made a lot of progress in its depiction of black culture, and that includes allowing more black writers and producers to take the creative lead in shows aimed at the black community. Comment down below to share your favorite black Hollywood hero, or tell us what your favorite African-American television nuclear family is. As always, hit the like button to support more content and subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell to stay updated on all our latest content.